So, good evening, everybody, once again, and we are back with day two of Daily Answer Wars 3.0. So, this is also the initiative Daily Answer Wars Prime, and again, we will be discussing a question that was given to you in the morning session in the Telegram group. So, today's question was concerned with the GS1 Indian society part, especially the globalization's effect on Indian society. So again, in this session, we'll be going according to the same format that we usually do. Like first, we will try to discuss the question that was given, a basic framework of the answer we will try to arrive upon, and then we will move towards evaluation and feedback of your copies that you have submitted in the group before 2 p.m. Now, meanwhile, you can also ask your doubts in the chat box, and I will try to address those doubts. Good evening, Harji. So today's question was basically about globalization and its impact on indigenous cultural values. So the question was examine the impacts of globalization on indigenous cultural values. So we had to dissect the question in a manner like we had to talk about the impacts, both positive and negative. That was the key thing in this question of globalization on the cultural values that are native to our own country, native to India. So we had to analyze this question in that perspective. So we could have followed the same format that we usually do. First, write a basic introduction of like 20-25 words, and then go on for talking about the positive impacts in the body on cultural values, and then the negative impacts on the cultural values, and then go for a conclusion. So this was the basic framework of the answer. Now we will try to look upon the points that we could have mentioned in our answer. So first of all, in introduction, we could have just talked about the definition of globalization. Like you can just go with a basic definition in your own words. What I have written is globalization can be defined as the process of increasing interdependence and integration between the countries. So basically, globalization is like when trade, when movement of people, everything is interconnected and pretty open. Like there is a lack of protectionism, and like all the countries intermingle with each other, and many cultures and traditions all mix up, so that you can write it in your own language only, but a basic definition of globalization was necessary in the introduction, you can say here. So now after that, I have used a linking statement to give the examiner an idea of what is going to come out next. So the process of globalization has had distinct positive impacts upon the indigenous cultural practices. So after this, we will have to go and write all the positive impacts. You can write 3-4 positive impacts, and then we can go for the negative impacts. So good evening, Sahiba. So when we start, we can talk about first the positive impact. So why we will take one by one the points that we could have mentioned in our answer. So first point is about wider recognition. As an outcome of globalization, Indian cultural values have gained wider recognition on the global stage. Now, one thing you could have done is like mention each of the points, each with an example. Like example was mandatory, you can say in this answer, because that will help the examiner establish whatever you are writing. Like you will also be able to easily convey your points to the examiners. For example, nowadays we usually see holidays on Diwali in the USA. Even White House celebrates Diwali, and we get pictures of all of that. And Diwali is very indigenous festival to our country. So you can say that we have got wider recognition as an outcome of globalization. So this can be talked of as a positive effect. Next, we can talk about tourism. So globalization has made the richness of Indian culture a source of gaining revenue. Like we can see so many foreigners coming to our country for tourism because of globalization. Like we have also advertised our tourism, and open borders, like not exactly open borders, but no restrictions on tourism and all has led to increased footfalls in India. So you can talk about cultural tourism, tribal circuits, Buddhist circuits, etc. So these are decent examples that you can mention while talking about tourism. Next, we move on to rise of ICT. ICT is basically information and communication technologies, and you can very well, this point comes to our mind very well whenever we talk about globalization, because nowadays we can see that people sitting in Bangalore can do a remote work, which has remote work for a company which has, say, its head office in somewhere in USA, for example, in Boston or Texas, anywhere. So you can imagine the amount of interconnectivity that globalization has led to, and this has also created a lot of jobs in India. Many information communication technologies offer remote jobs to people from India, and globalization has aided all of this. So you can talk about rise of ICT have made cultural practices more accessible and sustainable for all. And you can also see that there are many things like online virtual darsans, virtual crackers, virtual fire show. Even in New Year, we saw that there was online fire show, and also you can talk about those things due to rise of ICT. Next, we can talk about the soft power. So, globalization has enhanced the importance of cultural practices as a source of country's soft power. For example, now yoga gets recognized all over the world. For example, International Yoga Day has also been. We have also started focused on International Yoga Day, and it has been. We have started celebrating it as a International Yoga Day. So you can talk about that. Next, we can talk about the indigenous people consensus. So globalization has also made the indigenous people conscious of their cultural practices and hence led to their conservation. So when we see that, this point basically means that whenever we understand that some practices in our culture are pretty important and leads to uh, generation of revenue and all, so people try to conserve that cultural practice, and the globalization has aided in that process also. So you can give an example of tribal people and their uh, cultural preservation. So you can talk about those examples here. Also, we can talk about this hybrid fusion. For example, we can see uh, dishes like pizza dosa. You can see fusion music, fusion cuisines. So like Western music and Indian music are all collaborating together to give rise to this fusion type of music, and this is also a different category that has formed. So globalization has played an important part in creation of hybridized fusion culture. So you can talk about these many positive points when you talk about the positive impacts of globalization on the indigenous culture. So after this, we can move to the negative impacts. So basically, you did not have to mention all of these points. Even if you could have mentioned three, four of these points, I think that should have been enough. You could have like integrated some of the points. For example, music, dance, culture, cultural practices. These last 2 points could have been integrated if you wanted to shorten some part of your answer. Next, we could move on to talking about the negative impacts of globalization on indigenous cultural practices. So, what are the negative impacts? So, first of all, one of the main negative impacts is on the family values. Nowadays, we see rising divorce rates. We also see nuclearization of families. So, all of this can be written in sub points, which I have tried to mention here. So, globalization has negatively affected the status of elderlies in the traditional family systems. So like we see the phenomenon of like elderlies being put into old age homes and all of this because of stress in jobs for the younger people, or mismatch between the value system between the elder people and the younger lot. So there has been a generation gap aided by globalization. So you can talk about those things. Loneliness among the elderly is a major cause of emotional distress, anxiety, depression, etc. Next, we can talk about the nuclear family. So globalization has also disrupted the framework for joint families in the countries, giving way to nuclear families. Next, we can talk about increasing divorce rates, which are also, you can say, a byproduct of globalization due to highly stressed lives and highly stressed work environment and jobs. Next, we can talk about westernization. So, one of the main beneficiaries of globalization has been the West, although they do not admit it, but one of the westernization has been a very remarkable feature of globalization. So, increased proclivity towards Western food products promoted by marketing has affected indigenous cuisines. Example, carbonated drinks preferred over buttermilk. So you can see that we are all Indian market is flooded with so many cold drinks and all of those are as a result of globalization. All of them have head offices in US and somewhere in the West, and they all sell their products in our such a large market. So you can talk about that. Next, you can also talk about Western attire has overshadowed the indigenous attire. For example, we wear jeans, and also that is also an example of globalization because that is not the indigenous Indian attire. Loss of turban you can talk about. So those examples you can mention here. Next, we can move on to talking about music. So Indian classical music and all have been limited. So you can give that example. Like globalization has increased the popularity of Western music like rock, pop, jazz, etc. It has in turn reduced the appeal of and awareness about indigenous music styles. So you can talk about limited popularity of Hindustani classical music and all. Next, we can move on to talking about the dance. All of this can be included as sub points in cultural values. So indigenous dance styles like Kathak, Kathakali, Kuchipudi find a limited appeal among the youth. You don't see like people inclined to learn all these classical dance forms. Instead, they go for hip hop and something like that. So you can talk about those things. So you need to pick out examples from around your environment, which you can think can make some innovative points in such an answer. so who are relatively more influenced by the fast-paced disco culture. Next, we can talk about alienation. So rise in ICT in a globalized world have affected the indigenous culture of outdoor and physical activities. Not only elders, we also see that younger lot or the younger generation are more inclined to indoor games now, like video games, online gaming, and all of this has been a result of globalization only, because most of these games and all are developed in the western part of the world, and then they travel to native indigenous countries and uh, affect that culture. Like all the outdoor and physical activities are like going less and less as we progress. Next, we can talk about this salutations. So you can see that indigenous Indian style was to touch the feet of the elders. So that has been replaced by now handshakes or like hugs, you can say. So those things, our cultural salutary styles are replaced with Western ways of salutation. So these things can be talked about as the negative impacts of globalization on the indigenous culture. So again, here also you could have just mentioned 3 4 points, and since this is a 10 marker, I think that would have sufficed for your answer. And in the conclusion, you could just summarize what all we have written with basic caution about negative effects of globalization and optimism towards the positive effects. So you can basically write that globalization is a dynamic process of constant intermingling of people and ideas. While we need to promote its positive influences, its negative externalities should be actively checked. So we should not be against globalization, but we should try to take out its positives and promote its positives, whereas the negatives should also be checked so that our indigenous culture also survives and thrives. So you can talk about that in the conclusion. So that was the basic framework, I can say, for today's answer. These 4 points in each of these two topics, these two sub points could have made your answer pretty good. Some innovative points around examples from around you could have added value to this answer. So we will now move on to checking what all you have written and try to dissect what you have written and what all you could have added. So first of all, we move to Avnish's copy. Let us see. Globalization describes the growing interdependence of the world's economies, culture, and world's economies. It would be okay. Cultures and populations brought about by cross-border trade in goods and services, technology, and flows of investment. Okay. So you can keep the definition a bit crisp. Otherwise, like your concept is fine. Like you're trying to define, and that is okay in the introduction. Reasons for globalization is not required here. In fact, they have not asked the reasons. Question is pretty short and simple, that you just need to write about the impacts on the indigenous cultural values. So this part can really be avoided here. Also, this is not a 15 marker, so you don't have the scope. We already have a lot of content for our answer, so we can directly move to the impacts. So globalization as impacts of globalization on indigenous culture values. Globalization as social driver. It promoted consumerism, method of education still changed. Every country trying to collaborate with other country for tech transfer, skill exchange. Example. Okay, fine. This is something positive you have written. Globalization as cultural driver, behavioral change, population, promotion of foreign languages, strong movies, cross country migration increased. That is more Indian student pursuing higher studies. Okay, fine. Globalization as demographic drivers, increasing population due to migration and permanent settlement, improving health status due to more awareness. Okay, negative impacts of globalization, lifestyle changes rapidly. In part, I think you have understood the demand of the question quite well, Avnish. But what you just needed to do here is like give equal attention to both the positives and negatives. For example, you have written the positives quite elaborately, but negatives have been just somehow been adjusted. It seems like growth of capitalism. So how is this a negative? So you need to explain your negatives also. Like you can give some examples on the negatives and its impacts. So try to do that. So social inequality increased, import activities increases. So all of these you can just try to give some examples and explain why you think these are the negatives. And positives can also be likewise shortened a bit. Like in each sub point, you just try to mention one point, and that should be enough, I will say. So next we move to the conclusion part of this answer. Let us see. Globalization impacted our society in both positive as well as negative way. Food, clothes, entertainment habits changes rapidly. Its impact on environment is also significant due to rapid consumerism. Okay, consumerism is fine, but this line is very good. Food, clothes, entertainment. So these are our. You can dissect these in the body parts, like what impact it had on food, attire, what impact it has on music and dance, and so these things form our indigenous cultural values. So you can talk about these things in a bit of detail, like both the So overall, I will say like you will get 3.5 out of 10 for this answer, Avnish. Next, we move to Ritu's copy. Globalization means free flow of people, goods, services, investment, and ideas across the borders. It integrated economies and societies. This is fine. Impact of globalization on culture, revival of culture, hybridization, localization. Okay, fine. Localization is a good term. Homogenization, westernization. Okay. So this is, I think, you have written overall impact here. Now let us move what you have talked about. Homogenization has an impact on indigenous culture values, consumerist culture, fast fashion, dressing code, use of English language, positive, negative, McDonaldization of food habits, positive, negative, okay. Hybridization has an impact, positive, negative, hybridization of family, remix of music and dance culture, role of elderly in family decreasing, positive, new forms of family structure, example, okay, restoring to both allopathic and traditional medicines, okay, revival of culture, international yoga day, demand of Indian products at global level, example, okay, fine, revival of Ayush medicine, religious revivalism, okay, fine. Indian culture has remained intact right from Vedic times, present COVID-19 times, where world witnessed solidarity, collective humanism. Moreover, India being an accommodative country, changed with time to bring social reforms that hold its cultural values. Okay, fine. Like introduction and conclusion of this answer is good, but I think again here you can just uh, go if you are writing like positives and negatives, so try to do it in all parts of the answer, or otherwise what you can do is write the positives at once first and then go for the negatives. For example, here in revival of culture, most of the points that you have written are the positives, but you have not mentioned the negatives, like what all negative effects on dance music, or you can say our other like other things, negative things that has happened, impact globalization's impact negatively on Indian culture. You have not mentioned it here, so you can talk about that also. This part is fine. Family values and all is good. Next part, this one is also okay. Like hybridization has an impact on indigenous cultural values, also fine. You have mentioned both positives and negatives, so it is good. But I will say like you can just go for talking about the positive impacts first and then negative impacts. So that will make structure your answer better. Otherwise, what you have to do is like mention positives, negatives multiple times in your answer, which is just eating up your space. For example, you have to write every time positives, negatives. So rather than that, what you can do is all the positives at one place and all the negatives at one place. That will improve the presentation of your answer. Overall, this thing you can also write in conclusion like overall impact of globalization on culture. However, this is also good. Like since you have expressed it in diagram, it does not eat up your word limit, and also you can mention this. But still, the points are pretty good. Just the presentation can be improved a bit. So I will think 4.5 out of 10 is what you will get for this answer. Ritu. Most of the points are good. I will say examples are also mentioned. Now let us move to Nisha's copy. Globalization has made the world borderless, interdependence of the world's economies, intermingling of culture, cross-border trade, technology, and few of investment and information. Okay, indigenous culture of India, secularism, diversity, caste system, transition, multiculturalism. Okay, impact of globalization on indigenous culture, homogenization is fine. Emergence of nuclear family, culture of leading life in virtual space, emergence of e-commerce. Try to mention examples in all of this, like what is like leading life in virtual space, emergence of e-commerce. You can mention some examples here also. Next, in hybridization, you have talked about not selling beef product due to Hindu festivals. So again, like this is good, but what is it, whether it is positive or negative, you just need to mention that, like divide your answer in positives and negatives. I think this is negatives, I will guess. Impact of globalization on indigenous culture, you have used this subheading here, and again here you have mentioned the same thing, positive impacts of globalization on indigenous culture. So I think you can just improve the subheadings first, go for the positive impacts, then go for the negative impacts. Indian movies prevalence across world, international yoga day, vocal for local, made in India, globalization is who have both, then tail. Okay, the need of the hour is that we need to change ourselves according to time and maximize the positives. Okay, so conclusion is good. So again, I think all of you have the content, like most of the things you are writing culturally also, and like impact on family values, impact on hybridization, all of these things are good points, but structuring is a bit of an issue what I am seeing in these answers. Like you can just mention two neat subheadings, that is positive impacts of globalization, next the negative impacts of globalization on cultural values, and then go for writing your points along with examples. That will fetch you more marks, and that will also make it easier for the examiner to check your copies. Like he will understand what overall how much knowledge you have and how you are presenting the answer. So I think overall you will get 4 out of 10 for the content. Some of the examples are missing in this answer, and also presentation wise, the answer is lacking a bit. Otherwise, it is fine. Content wise, it is decent enough, and intro conclusion is also good. So 4 out of 10 is what you will get for this answer, Nisha. Next, we move to Manu Jansu's copy. Globalization is increased interaction of people around impacts, loss of traditional knowledge plus threat to intergenerational equity, human genome development programming, monopolizing use of seeds, medicines, and traditional systems, commodification of free resources, Chinese firms, most of the lithium mines in Argentina, find diversity loss, biodiversity threat, reduced use of bamboo, marginalization of culture, negative. One thing I'll say, Manu Jansu, what you have done is like you have gone a bit very broad. Like the question is pretty clear that it is asking about indigenous cultural values. So you just need to stick to mostly to cultural values. You need not go into economics and all, like impact of Chinese firms and all. That is like very much delving deep into economics. So you can just borderline passing when you do the passing mention of those things, but don't go for explaining those things in a lot of detail. What you need to explain is impact on Indian culture, like our family system, our food, our music and dance. So those are things of culture. So you can talk about impact on those things, how we salute each other. So positives and negatives in that dimension should be mentioned. Otherwise, this answer becomes very broad, and like it is not clear what like what you are trying to address is not pretty clear. You are just presenting all of what you know in this answer, it seems. For example, this point, commodification of free resources. So I don't get it how it impacts negatively Indian culture. So you can just explain it in that manner. Either you can link it to Indian culture somehow, or you can just avoid it. You can go for things that are, for example, these points: McDonaldization of culture. You can talk about negative acculturation. You can talk about. These are good points. Thus, globalization on one hand has led to spread and development of new cultures. On the other, there is need to ensure that it does not destroy the traditional culture passed on from generation to generation. Conclusion is also decent, good enough. Introduction is fine. Positives are also good. Negative parts I think can be a bit better. For example, you can just stick to talking about negative impacts on Indian culture. That will make this answer better. What is this? Drivers okay. So this is okay, but not required. I'll say here. So overall, I think you will get 4 out of 10 just for the negatives. Some marks will be deducted. Otherwise, I think decent answer examples have also been used well. Next, we move to Sweta's copy. Globalization is process of growing global interconnectedness through exchange of social, economic, political, cultural, and technological attributes, which in modern sense entered India after 1991 reforms. Okay, global cultural globalization causes. Again, causes is not required. So stick to that. What has been asked in the question? You can just mention when you have the scope of mentioning these things when they are asking for 15 marks. In 10 markers, you don't have that much scope, I will say. Globalization impact on indigenous cultural values. Language is fine. Again, you have gone for like in that manner only positives and negatives. So okay, you can go in this manner also. Like presentation in this manner is also decent. But I will say that in this, what you have to do is like you have to draw flowchart every time. So if you write all the positives at once and all the negatives at once, that will save you some of your mehnat, hard work in the answering process. Food and clothing positives are fine. Growing popularity of items okay. Relaxed and liberal clothing. Demand of handicrafts education is also good. Streams to pursue awareness among rural to foreign institutes promoting Sanskrit. Bhagavad Gita, okay, communalization of education. This will focus on degrees, more than useful knowledge, loss of interest towards Vedic knowledge in Indian schools, okay. Threat of non-communicable diseases from fast foods, traditional foods, sciences of forgotten. So these are good points, I'll say. Decent number of points are written. Nuclear family, especially in urban areas. Traditional the vigor of transformed sense of self-awareness among Indians is vital for success of globalization. The interconnectedness between various cultures should reinforce without disturbing national unity. So, okay, conclusion is also good, but I think you have exceeded the word limit. I will say here. Try to finish your answer within 1.5 to 2 pages. So that is what you will get in UPSC answer sheets. So, for example, this thing can be omitted here. And also, if you go for writing positives at one place and negatives at one place, some of the points can be shortened and you can just finish it inside 2 pages. Otherwise, you can just, it is such a topic that you will not fall short of content. So, you will keep on writing. If you go on picking one topic and then writing its positives and negatives, so you won't understand. When you write about language, you will go on writing 3 4 points here, 3 4 4 points here, and at the end, you will feel that you have loss of both word limit and space. So try to go for positive negative approach, like mentioning positives first and then negatives. That will make you stick to the word limit. So overall decent answer, but again, since you have exceeded the word limit, that will lead in some uh, loss of marks. Otherwise, content wise, this answer is pretty good. So 4.5 out of 5 is what you will get for this answer, Sweta. Just try to stick to the word limit. That will do you good, and that will also be near to your exam experience. It will try to simulate the exam experience in your answers when you write it. Just do not go on to show your knowledge. That is of no use here right now. So you can just stick to what has been asked and try to remain inside the word limit. So that will be it for today, guys. I think we talked about globalization and its positive and negative impacts on the indigenous Indian cultural values. So again, we will meet tomorrow with a new topic, and by that time, you can also go for the night owl discussions and all. Sweta, yes, sir. I wrote and then realized it was 150 words only. Yes, Sweta, that is what I told you. You can just first go for the positives and then negatives. That will help you in good state. Otherwise, when you start writing, you don't understand. You don't realize how much we have to write. So we go on explaining our initial part of the answer pretty well. Like the first 2 3 points are explained pretty well, and then we just somehow end the answer. So that is not what is desirable. So you can go for the approach that I mentioned. So that will be it for today, guys. Next, we will meet tomorrow again. We will give a question in the Telegram group, and the evaluation and feedback session will be in the evening. And I'll see you guys there. And hope you keep on practicing answer writing. And also, I will like to comment that the peer reviews have been really well. You are doing good. So keep on doing that. Don't stop doing that. That also helps to increase your knowledge alongside the person whose copy you are checking. Both those students get benefited. So try doing that and keep on writing. Again, tomorrow we'll meet with a new set of question, with a new question and some new approaches to answer writing. So thank you very much. See you guys tomorrow.